Hello, it's me again, Mick Roberts. After my first video went out, I've been in touch with a number of political parties and they've informed me they knew absolutely nothing about the Home Office's deception regarding empty prisons. So please watch this second video of mine. It should be very interesting. Thank you.
The British public are being deceived blatantly by the Home Office, who for a long time have been bleating out to the public via the media that they are desperately short of accommodation for the rescued small boat migrants who are flocking to this country in ever-increasing numbers. This is and remains the pathetic excuse for using expensive hotels all over the country in which to house the small boat migrants. There is no shortage of accommodation for migrants asylum seekers. The Home Office is guilty of a massive deceit upon this country's inhabitants. The fact is glaring and there for everyone to see. The thousands of migrants, most of whom are not genuine asylum seekers, escaping a war zone, are now laughing at the British public for being so glib at accepting them all as being in immediate need of help. They will continue to pour in, especially during the coming summer, and we will be overwhelmed with them. This is why the deceit practiced by the Home Office must be exposed, and this is how. In my previous video, I have outlined a number of empty prisons around this country, some of which are being used as tourist attractions, whereby a retired warder shows tourists around an empty prison for a small fee and allows them to take videos and photos of the prison's interior with a brief history of someone infamous who was a previous inhabitant. The Home Office refuses to mention anything about empty prisons except to say that they were closed as a cost-cutting measure some years ago. Various Home Secretaries have all repeated this excuse, but now that the migrant accommodation issue has become a public issue, they choose to hush up the fact of having over 15 empty prisons all over the UK that could be used to accommodate all those fit and healthy young males who are being put up by the taxpayer in expensive hotels when there is absolutely no need for this. Take Camp Hill Prison on the Isle of Wight. This prison has enough accommodation to rehome several thousand males. It has separate buildings which are not Victorian designed and instead are modern type buildings separated from each other and could be run independent of each other. There are workshops inside which could be used by the young males who could work on a voluntary basis, seeing as they are not allowed to seek paid employment whilst awaiting asylum outcomes. Such voluntary work would pay for the refurbishment of any of the empty prisons to make them more suitable for civilian habitation. If the Home Office says they cannot allow migrants to carry out voluntary work due to legislation, then simply change that law. In any event, the Home Office has stated that they shut those prisons down as part of a cost-cutting move. They fail to say now how that cost-cutting move has and still is costing them over £6 million a day. The use of the empty prisons would reduce that cost considerably. If the human rights agitators complain about those prisons having high walls and fences, then the obvious reply is that asylum seekers have complained a great deal about being subjected to protesters outside their hotels screaming abuse at them and making them feel unsafe or vulnerable. Another excellent reason to move them behind the high walls and fences. At least they will be safe and away from any protesters who quite rightfully protest against them, as we all should. The UK has enough military and border force officials to do that job, and as they already have permission to patrol French beaches, it should be easier to scuttle the small boats before they attempt the crossing. Again, the Home Office does nothing, while the Prime Minister appears to remain content to allow the Home Secretary to carry on doing nothing. The use of the empty prisons, and I focus on one named as a previous Borstal, and then a young prisoners training institution finally ending up as a prison for a mixture of criminals. Camp Hill on the Isle of Wight. This comprises a number of purpose built accommodation blocks, and large dormitories which could be home to thousands of asylum seekers. You ask any genuine asylum seeker who has been living outdoors in a camp or fields, or more commonly on a beach in coastal France, would they be grateful for having a room or family rooms in the UK which would be safe and warm for them and their family? In fact, I can assure you that even if they were asked to do their own decorating of the accommodation and their own furnishing, they would be more than happy to do this. That would cut the cost to the taxpayer enormously, and with volunteer labour from the thousands of young men who could carry out the plastering and bricklaying for the pocket money they already are getting, then surely this would be a very worthwhile project. Again, back to the human rights sympathizers. If they were not happy at the idea of migrants or asylum seekers living behind high walls and fences, then take down the walls and fences and just use the accommodations inside them. There can be no doubt that once the walls and fences were down, the accommodations would be flooded with press, auditors, and information gatherers who would no doubt expose in full the true reasons for so many young males to be over here seeking a sanctuary they know is not warranted at all. This would then expose in turn the further deceits practiced by the Home Office upon the public. My message to the Home Office once again is this: open up your empty prisons and make them the chief accommodation sources for asylum seekers and small boat migrants. Use the voluntary labour from asylum seekers, migrants, to refurbish those empty prisons. There is evidence that over 19 terrorists are in this country, having arrived here in the guise of migrants or asylum seekers. Such identity cards could incorporate a fingerprint of the holder, which could then be used for his asylum claim, and without such a card, it could be made impossible for an immigrant to work or stay in the UK at all. This would, of course, entail all small boat arrivals to be kept in a confined place until such a card has been issued to him or her. Such a place could be an accommodation in one of the empty prisons, where a detained person could be monitored simply by virtue of the fact that every empty prison has only one entrance exit point. Like all the empty prisons, Camp Hill has its own kitchen, dining areas, medical units, religious units, many recreation zones, and many outdoor working areas such as gardens and farms. It has scope for many extra dormitories within the huge grounds of the empty prison. Like military bases, the open areas could be used for many dormitories. No doubt the word would soon get out that such places were not as brilliant as hotels, and the mere words that indicate the accommodation as an... This would put a lot of fake asylum seekers off from claiming asylum. A special task force should be set up just to identify any small boat arrivals, and this could be done through interpreters and checking a location in the country of origin or where the arrival says he has come from. A special consideration for local residents, who quite rightly fear the explosion of so many young males among them, could be appeased by the Camp Hill authorities imposing a curfew to have all the inhabitants in by a fixed time and to restrict the numbers leaving for town, so that there is a controlled visits to town system in place agreed to before asylum seekers and migrants take accommodation in the empty prisons. In other words, a curfew, and to a genuine asylum seeker who is awaiting for their claim to go through, would not be a burden. The whole object of having been given or promised a UK identity card is an incentive to do the right thing in advance of such a claim for asylum. As they were all illegal in their actions by arriving in small boats, they would welcome accommodation, be it an empty prison or hotel or military camp. Those without any documents should be detained until the UK authorities have established who they really are and where they came from. Again, an empty prison for such arrivals would be legal and right for everyone. They could have complete freedom inside the empty prison, but not be allowed to leave until their identity has been established and they have been fingerprinted. Again, voluntary work would be available to them too. Assist their fellow asylum seekers, migrants. They could help prepare accommodations for their fellow compatriots, and among them would be painters, builders, decorators, and woodworkers, along with many other trades. I finalize this clip with a message to the Prime Minister and Home Secretary. Stop fooling around with your deceit upon the public about the problem of accommodation for migrants. You have the buildings, and you have the space. You have much voluntary labor who would love to work unpaid. And you have security for the migrants, asylum seekers, and the Home Office. Use those empty prisons now. My first indication directly to your office was to open up Northie X prison. You eventually did this, now open up the others. Calling all auditors around the UK. Those with drones, please target the empty prisons near you and discover just how many rooms there are, or previous cells, that could be converted to civilian use. Your drones could land inside and count all the structures that could hold the small boat migrants as they come in. Remember, each single cell has one window. Each cell can hold 2 persons. 2 window cells could hold up to 5-6 persons. Also, 2-3 window cells could hold a complete family. That's how you can judge how many empty habitations exist in an empty prison. Dormitory huts can house so many more. Your findings could be of great value to the protesters against immigration, and also those for immigration. Please do it as you auditors now hold the key to hard evidence.